Back to our top story this hour. It's been a frustrating month of September for SASSA grant recipients in the country. A Postbank system glitch meant about 500,000 recipients could not receive their money on time. Others are only receiving it today, 3 weeks later. This has had a serious impact on livelihoods and families who solely depend on grants. With October's payment cycle in just 2 weeks from now, many are already hoping this issue or this glitch does not happen again. Are there solutions to avoid this debacle? Well, let's speak to Keith Breckenridge from Wits, Institute for Social and Economic Research. Keith, good afternoon. Thanks for your patience. Welcome to today. I mean, it's like we've been here before. There has been a couple of similar incidents around these glitches. So I call them so-called glitches because we really never get to be told exactly what went wrong. Happened in December and grant beneficiaries were affected in January. Now we are here again. We're told it's a system change. I mean, you've expressed views before, for example, about postal bank or not postal bank. But what I just want to get to with you now, Keith, are there other alternatives that could assist us to make sure that those who receive their grants are not affected by so-called glitches?
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much for having me. I think there probably are alternatives. I think we need to be careful. One of the reasons we're in this mess is because the kind of politics and the NGOs and the Constitutional Court, I think, jumped without really considering what would happen when we moved away from NetOne to the post office. So the post office itself pitched, it needed the grants to basically drive a turnaround program. In 2017, Mark Barnes said the grants will be the thing that basically makes this a kind of powerful instrument for the state, powerful organ for the state. And the post office was already in very serious trouble. You'll remember, especially on the Highveld. I think there's a big difference in the performance of the post offices the closer you get to Cape Town. And that is also, Dan, one of the problems is some of the decision-making and the lobbying is coming from Cape Town. And that's far from the kind of institutional disorder that you live with if you live on the Highveld. So I think, to get to your question, the post office has been in very serious trouble. It was in serious trouble functioning as a post office from 2015, losing between 500 million and R1 billion a year, and it's only getting worse. It's getting. I think anybody who thinks that the post office is a secure place to deliver the country's social welfare system is not paying any attention at all. There are alternatives, but they are not easy to implement, and it's going to be very difficult, I think. One of them would be to build the social grant system into the payment system itself, and make the banks essentially or Home Affairs responsible for managing how those transfers take place. One of the stories, Dan, that's sort of bubbling in the background is the security of the transfer. So in 2018. Famously and uniquely, it's never happened anywhere else in the world, the Postbank lost the master key, or they weren't confident about where the master key was that allows you basically to program any smart card in the system, and they were forced to reissue cards to the entire SASSA Postbank recipient.
Yeah, population. Because some of the beneficiaries were telling our reporters, is this new gold cards or something like that that is not working. But Keith, I mean, you made a very interesting point that somehow somebody is not listening. You cannot use the postal service system to pay the SASSA grants.
I think that's right. I think it's going to get worse and worse. I think the post office has been hoping that once they are delivering the grants, that will mean they're an indispensable service like, Eskom, and that the government will have to pay. The problem is they're collapsing. I mean, you'll know this. Their branches are being closed all over the country. There are terrible problems with retrenchment. The other functions are not working at all. And then the security is a serious, serious problem. Never mind the technical issues. So all of these are, it's not an easily resolved problem. And I think people who think you could just hand this over to the banks are not looking at the problems of securing the payments. So what we had with NetOne, people forget, was biometrically encrypted payments. So you couldn't get the payment unless it was the fingerprint of one of the grant recipients. But now, if we move the system into the banks are going to have a very difficult and onerous responsibility of checking to see that the person who receives the payment is in fact the legitimate grant recipient. It's a very difficult problem.
Yeah, Keith, just very briefly, before we conclude, just remind, you wrote a paper about this NetOne thing. Why did we dump them?
So NetOne was a pretty remarkable, and I said this in many places over a long period of time, and I said it at the time when the Black Sash and many of my colleagues were getting extremely upset about NetOne making about 7-8 billion rand a year from everything. It wasn't just from social grants; it was from grants and from POSs. They did a lot of the payment systems in the rural areas. They had a remarkable biometric encrypted offline smart card system, so they could deliver grants where the network didn't exist, and they used to send the trucks with the little machines on them into the villages. Dan, this is the big difference, is that poor people got their grants where they lived under NetOne, and ever since the post offices had the contract, they've had to pay taxis, and in the process, eat up probably half the grant on the transport costs. And the outrage that was coming from, and a lot of this is from colleagues who were playing in the factional fight between the ministers in the ANC, and who saw the NetOne as being associated with the Zuma faction, and they went after NetOne as a kind of engine of corruption.
I remember
there's
now.
Very poor evidence that was true, and as you will know, in the 10 million pages of the Zondo Commission, there's no mention of NetOne. Everything else is discussed. There's a SAA, there's EOH. There's every government division. There's nothing about NetOne. So NetOne was, I think, unfairly attacked because of what we would call the political settlement. They had given gifts, contract security, catering, those kinds of things to people who were close to the ministers. And there was some BEE buyout, but they were essentially thrown under the bus of the Ramaphosa faction.
Yeah, but if you extend that line, or you've just expressed the keys, they were throwing grant beneficiaries under the bus as well. I don't know how they're going to sort it out, because the post office is in a big mess. Thank you very much, Keith Breckenridge, a researcher, the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research. At the top of